Delighted to kick things off here. Welcome, everyone. Really looking forward to today's session. My name is Sean Gallagher. I'm Executive Director of the Center for the Future of Higher Education and Talent Strategy at Northeastern University. It's been a real privilege to be a part of this group. My research focuses on the intersection of work and post-secondary learning. And of course, this convening just comes at such a key moment in this economic recovery and in a time where we're seeing the rapid digital transformation of work and accelerating automation across the economy. My work stream that I've been helping drive and also my research focuses quite a bit on employers. And what we're finding these days is employers are hungry for talent. 9.3 million job openings right now in the United States. That's a record. And there's also some evidence emerging that upskilling and training are getting a renewed focus, which was arguably not actually the case before COVID-19. We have a couple surveys that have just come back from the field. One is a national survey of 750 HR leaders. There we're seeing that upskilling is right alongside hiring as a top talent priority for them. We have a similar survey of 1,000 C-suite executives and some evidence emerging there that learning and development and training investment is growing specifically due to the pandemic. So there's your working learners. And I find the phrase working learner to be so powerful because of its duality and the order there. Consider how the term student has failed to capture this audience that we're talking about and connotes only traditional higher education. But I think it'd be a mistake to think of working learners only as workers at the mercy of corporations' investments, whether those are benevolent and supportive or mercenary and capitalistic, depending on your point of view. And there's an important structure and identity associated with being engaged in some type of formal learning effort, that is, being a learner. So as learning and working blur, one of the big questions, especially in the United States, is whose responsibility is lifelong learning or training, and who pays for it? What is the new social compact? Is it the employee, the employer? Do we need an updated set of policies and incentives, some kind of new architecture? In our surveys and others, only about 50% of US CEOs believe it is primarily their responsibility to pay for worker training. And many organizations have been disinvesting in training for decades, while others have been stepping up to the plate like we often read in the news. On the other hand, if you look at Germany or even China, it's 85% of CEOs who view it as their responsibility. In the UK, we see the apprenticeship levy. In Singapore, the Skills Future Initiative and individual learning accounts for their citizens. Does everyone deserve a certain level of credential, as we saw with the high school diploma in the last century? Will new types of credentials be up to the task? Will they be delivered mainly by accredited institutions or, as we're seeing in an increasing number of examples, by companies? My point here isn't to focus on policy, but to suggest that the relationship between work and learning, just like work and home over this last year, has never been more fluid and dynamic. We're at a really pivotal moment. And in fact, in our latest executive survey, a majority of employers report that COVID-19 has accelerated their plans to adopt automation and AI, and that workers should be more worried about their skills becoming outdated. And that's just part of why our dialogue, today's discussion and onward, framing that work ahead is so exciting. MJ, over to you.
Thanks, Sean. I'm MJ Bishop, Associate Vice Chancellor and Director of the William E. Kerwin Center for Academic Innovation at the University System of Maryland, and I'm thrilled to be here and to be part of this conversation. Sean and I both also had the opportunity to be part of the organizing committee, and it's just so exciting to see how this has all come together. So University System of Maryland is a microcosm of higher ed. We have 3 research-intensive institutions, 3 HBCUs, a variety of regional comprehensives, and UMGC, our adult serving online institution. And my job is to work with those 12 four-year public higher ed institutions on thinking about all things academic innovation. So we get involved in open educational resources, digital badging, all sorts of other alternative credentials, adaptive learning environments, and so forth. My background, though, is in instructional design and technology. And prior to coming to Maryland, I was at Lehigh University for 13 years in the learning sciences and technology faculty. So I always come to these discussions about learning systems from that perspective. And in fact, when I think about what it will take for our campuses to become more student-centered, I draw a great deal from well-established learning design principles and practice. And I'm going to put some of these in the chat for you. I think we should be reaching out to the students we have, for example, instead of presupposing who our students should be. That's a fundamental principle of instructional design that encourages us to do that learner analysis and to understand who our learners are and what they're coming to the table with when they approach our learning environments. I also think we should be valuing the experiences and prior knowledge that our learners come with instead of assuming everyone is coming with a blank slate. That we should be helping learners articulate their educational goals instead of defining student success for learners as degree completion. I think we should be connecting the dots between school and career and life goals instead of providing so little curricular cohesion as we do currently. I think we should be providing relevant learning opportunities, both curricular and co-curricular, instead of assuming that learning stops outside of the classroom. We should be measuring what learners know and are able to do instead of measuring recall of content that's covered in class. And we need to be clearly communicating those competencies when our learners have achieved them and to all downstream stakeholders instead of simply communicating what we taught them. As has been mentioned here previously, the global pandemic has shown a bright light on how slow higher education has been to respond to the growing need to do more to support working learners in achieving their educational goals. There's no question here about the moral imperative. But like Sandy Baum in her paper that was made available to us, The Challenge of Defining, Measuring, and Improving Outcomes for Working Learners, I remain a little conflicted about whether we run the risk in our discussions about working learners of creating a false dichotomy, that we create a separate category for working learners while we continue to educate what we've been calling traditional college students the same way we always have in the past. Creating a false dichotomy in much the same way we've created a false dichotomy, I think, between high school students and college students, assuming that somehow miraculously the instant an 18-year-old arrives on our campuses that they somehow become independent, self-regulated learners. These are continua that I think we need to be very aware of and to make sure that we don't create these artificial categories. And don't get me wrong, I am thrilled about this discussion. From my instructional design perspective, I think we need much, much more research on working learners in order to understand how we best support their learning, what they need from us in order to succeed, and how we co-design these opportunities with employers that result in resume-worthy credentials. But I'd also caution us to avoid the temptation to create those false dichotomies and instead use the insights gathered from a new science for working learners, coupled with the myriad educational technologies that are now at our disposal, to inform the design of more personalized student-centered learning experiences and necessary support, and do what is necessary to support the success of every learner who comes to us with an educational goal to succeed. Thank you for that. I'm going to kick it over to Galina Alston to introduce our panel for the plenary today.
Greetings, colleagues. My name is Jelena Alston, and I am an associate professor in the Department of Leadership Studies and Adult Education in the College of Education, and I'm also a faculty affiliate with the Center of Excellence in Product Design and Advanced Manufacturing at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. It has been my delight to serve on this organizing committee and learn so much throughout these convenings. My scholarly engagement focuses on the sociocultural intricacies of women, minorities, and disenfranchised groups as adult learners. My most recent research interests are focused on specifically supporting adult learners at HBCUs. I look forward to the rich conversation that we'll have today. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the speakers for today's plenary. Dr. Karen Baker is a professor and director at the University of British Columbia and the author of more than 100 academic publications and 7 books. She obtained her PhD from Oxford University, where she studied as a Rhodes Scholar. She is a member of the boards of the International Institute of Sustainable Development, the New Digital Research Infrastructure Organization, and the National Research Council. Karen is also a serial tech entrepreneur. After founding 2 companies as CEO, she now serves as strategy director for a Vancouver-based social enterprise tech company, Ripen, where she designs innovative programs to support inclusive work-based learning for learners from underserved communities. Our other plenary speaker is Sanjay Sharma, and he is the Fred Fort Flowers and Daniel Fort Flowers Professor of Mechanical Engineering at MIT. He is also the Vice President for Open Learning there. He co-founded the Auto ID Center at MIT and developed many of the key technologies behind the EPC suite for RFID standards now used worldwide. He is also the founder of CTO of OAT Systems, which was acquired by Checkpoint Systems in 2008. He serves on boards of GS1 US in hawk child mining and several startup companies, including Top Flight Technologies. Dr. Sarma received his bachelor's from the Indian Institute of Technology, his master's from Carnegie Mellon University, and his PhD from the University of California at Berkeley. Dr. Sarma also worked on the Schlumberger oil field services in the UK and at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratories in Berkeley, California. He has authored over 150 papers in sensing, the Internet of Things, RFID, manufacturing, and other fields. So again, it is my distinct pleasure to engage in conversation with you today. And so Dr. Sarma, is it okay if I call you Sanjay during this conversation?
Yep.
Okay, so I want to start off the conversation and start with you and ask you, what are your thoughts about strategies and moving forward to enhance data-driven navigation systems as we strive to support working learners? This has been a topic of conversation, and it was brought up quite a bit last week. So what are your thoughts about that?
You know, Jelena, I think that the whole question of navigating your career, and I love that expression, is so fraught. Our students have very little information about where the jobs are, what courses will benefit from, what courses will benefit them where, and so on. It's almost like, if I drive from Boston to New York, the first thing I do is to turn on Google Maps or Waze and see where the traffic is and which road is closed. We don't have any of that. We do, it's beginning to emerge. But this has to be front and center, not just for students, but also for faculty. This is something that community colleges and universities have to take on seriously. I just feel that our whole quaternary, I call it the quaternary education system, that is in fact, I think a formal name for it, but post-tertiary education and tertiary education needs to be much, much more dynamic, much more nimble in connecting the pipeline, the supply chain of talent to the opportunities. And it's in that last mile that I see gap after gap, and young people with high debt find themselves in the chasm that has emerged between those two, between the pipeline and the demand.
Karen, what are your thoughts about the strategies to move forward, specifically with data-driven navigation systems?
Well, thanks, Sanjay. Excellent comments, and Jelena, great question. I agree that one of the key problems is employers often struggle to signal what skills they most need, and learners likewise struggle to understand what skills they need to acquire and also what skills they possess. It's hard for them to articulate what they can actually do in ways employers find legible or comprehensible. So the focus of a lot of my work is on how work-based learning can actually solve that. If we think of work-based learning as a mechanism to provide that valuable real-time data that Sanjay rightfully mentioned we urgently need, we could design programs that enhance the visibility and legibility of skills and competencies to help working learners navigate the labor market better, but also help employers signal the right skills in real time into the curriculum to assist with inclusive, strategic workforce development, which is an urgent priority. So I think there's a temporal element to the data, meaning you can have good data, but if your data is even a year out of date, it's no longer as relevant. So we have to craft strategies that have essentially educators and employers in dialogue to express the real-time skills needs they have. And I personally believe work-based learning is an excellent way to do that.
Thank you so much for both of your responses to that question. My next question is, could you talk a little bit about some of your contributions specifically with innovative work learning, or excuse me, work integrated learning, right? So what are some of the things that you've done?
Maybe I can just kick things off by saying my role at MIT is I'm the Vice President for Open Learning at MIT. I sit on the board of edX, which has been in the news of late. And my office has produced over 200 courses for edX. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we began to notice that the median age of students was 27. In other words, people in the workforce. And so we started studying, what they were looking for And we discovered this gaping hole, right? Which is that, you know, if I said to someone, hey, what's higher ed? They can describe it. It's community college, it's college, whatever it is. If I say, what's quaternary education? What's workforce education? You always get the head scratch because it's not clear what it is. So we started by putting together first MOOCs, then we started chunking MOOCs into these things called MicroMasters. We developed the first MicroMasters here. It's a credential. Now, there are now more than 50 MicroMasters from more than 25 universities on 4 continents. So it's beginning to take off, really, I think, underlying the need for credentials. Our education system is extremely monolithic right now. It's 4 years or 2 years or bust, right? Community colleges have been very innovative in creating credentials. But I do believe that our entire education system has to become less monolithic, more granular. And so we worked on that. We worked on the science of learning. We even worked on ways to take a learning accomplishment, such as, you know, you might attend a boot camp or take an online course. How do you prove that you did it? Well, today that is, you know, sort of in the control of the university. If you get 99 credits, you're a failure. But if you get 100 credits, you're a great success. You're a graduate. So we want to democratize this transcript. So we've created a blockchain-based way to verify transcripts, to verify accomplishments and put them on LinkedIn. So we've done a fair bit of work in the space, and as I think Mitchell or someone else very kindly put it up, we wrote a book about some of these things. But overall, I'll just end by saying that I believe education is at a threshold, especially for people who are, you know, older than 21, 22. And I think we need to become more agile with education. And I've begun to refer to it as agile continuous education. I think we need to sort of start a movement which enables people to sort of get on the ladder or the treadmill and stay on it, rather than the way we've designed it thus far.
So thank you for that. And I'm gonna circle back around to this point that you made about us being monolithic, but I want to hear Karen's points about, you know, tell us a little bit about what she's done and the work that she plans to continue to do in this space.
Well, thanks. It's a nice segue because my journey as an entrepreneur and strategist in this space was not an obvious one. I spent over 2 decades as a researcher in the environmental sciences. So you might be wondering why I'm speaking to these issues today. Well, Sanjay, my journey started when I taught a course on edX. I was one of the first at UBC invited to do so. We had originally signed a contract with Coursera, then pivoted over to edX. I got to experience both platforms. It was a great experience, but I have to tell you, it was a profound disappointment at the same time. And that is because I saw edX and Coursera and other MOOC platforms reproducing the sage on the stage model. And that sage on the stage model, as we all know, doesn't work well in online environments. It does not really enable learning retention or completion in the way we would like to see. So that launched me into building an edtech platform. I actually went to a startup weekend. I pitched, I met a technical co-founder. We built a company that is a platform that essentially developed an application that could plug into, well, any LMS or MOOC through LTI, designed to foster social learning, emotional intelligence, and soft skills, measure those, but also then assist with learning retention and completion. And we had some success with that. We plugged it into some MOOC courses. I grew it while on sabbatical at Stanford. That company was eventually acquired by Ripen, for which I now work as strategy director. Although I wouldn't say it was a success. I like to say about that experience, I just avoided failing and learned a lot of lessons along the way. So one of the lessons I think I learned is aspirationally, there's a huge gulf between what a community like we have gathered here today would like to see for working learners and learners more generally, and what the EdTech community can provide, in part because of what the venture capital wants to fund. I think we have to have a very serious conversation about alternative modalities of funding social benefit and social impact type EdTech platforms and companies that are missing in this space. Ripen aspires to be that. But you know, there are constraints from being VC funded that I think we need to acknowledge. I'll also say that I think professors and instructors need to get much more involved. And this has been another aspect of the contributions that I think are interesting for this group to consider. So I still teach. I actually am going to teach 264 students this year. I'm very research active. but I'm convinced that professors and instructors need to be more engaged in discussions about careers. My own research has pivoted somewhat to focus on the intersection of digital innovation, sustainability, and the future of work. And so sitting on the boards of some of these big organizations, I get to support initiatives to build frameworks and infrastructure for 21st century innovation and skills and competencies. But honestly, way more instructors and professors need to be doing that. So I'll just round that out by saying, a lot of these conversations have been confined to education or instructional design or senior administration in universities and colleges. What would it take for ordinary instructors and professors to feel that they could incorporate skills building and work-based learning in their courses? That actually is the question that inspired Ripen to be built as a platform. It's meant to be curriculum embedded, but there need to be many other options there. And if we can do that, we can scale these efforts much more quickly by mobilizing what is an under-mobilized contingent on campuses. I'll stop there.
Yeah, Jelena, I was also going to add that I think you're right, Karen. I think that especially when the first MOOCs were built, essentially they had a professor stand on the stage and record a whole lecture. And what happened was that we realized that, first of all, that violates all sorts of principles of cognitive science and human learning and the way the hippocampus works and so on, and the way the prefrontal cortex works. And so it's evolved quite a bit actually into very short, chunky videos. But I think that the platforms need to evolve a great deal to involve social learning, more engagement, and that is beginning to happen a little bit. The final thing is, I just want to say that in no way, just as you didn't say this, but I'm just going to say, do I feel that online education replaces in-person education? The problem, as many of us know, is that we waste our in-person time, we squander it with one-way lectures. And in some ways, the Zoom, university that we were all in is the worst of both worlds. It had neither the charm of in-person nor the true, value of good online. And so I hope when we get back to campus, we make in-person count. When we get back the privilege of being together, we can't just go back to what we could have done on Zoom.
And learners crave that. I'll just add a quick comment, hot pursuit. In a pre-internet era, and that's the era I was educated in, content was the scarce resource. Today, authentic interaction, relationships, and engagement are the scarce resource. That's what students crave. And that's really how deeply, how the fire is lit within to learn. So totally agree with you, Sanjay.
So before I move into this, my next question, I'm trying to monitor the chat a little bit. And there is one comment by Eric Bing, and it says, there's a big difference in needs of the working learner with a complicated life existing on a 10,000 a year in the bottom quintile and the needs of a higher level working learner that is looking to keep the current job or career relevant, right? And so with this in mind, what do you think are some of the critical challenges that we must really tackle? We must face these challenges and really figure out solutions as we strive to support working learners effectively in the future. And either one of you all can jump in and respond.
Maybe I'll just jump in and say that consider a persona, all right? So consider someone who does information technology at American Airlines. I just made that up. And they maintain the servers, now they do cloud, and now we know that cybersecurity is sort of a critical thing. They want to learn about cybersecurity. This person is 31, they have a couple of kids, they have a job, they can't, take a year off and go get a master's. So how do they take this on? We don't actually have a clear answer for that. Maybe the answer is you take a certificate course on one of the MOOC platforms, hopefully better done than when they were first launched, Sage on the Stage, more sort of engaging, interactive. By the way, I think some of the material there is now pretty spectacular, even on YouTube. As Karen said, there's some amazing material out there. If you want to learn something like cybersecurity. So you take a certificate, then you maybe go to a boot camp where you hang out. Even programming, in my view, is a team sport. So that's the in-person, that's the blended piece, right? Then maybe you do an internship, you get a certificate, or an apprenticeship. This is something that the Germans and the Nordic countries and Austria have done for years. A tremendous job of apprenticeships and certificated apprenticeships. So the idea here is that without giving up your job, you've upgraded your skills, you declare it provably on your LinkedIn page, you show it to your boss appreciates it because they need someone who understands how American Airlines operates, understands that cybersecurity is critical, you get some job mobility. That sort of persona and action plan, I don't think is clear yet. And we need to define it, for all the issues we have with regular college accreditation, and there are many issues with them, at least it's a system that you recognize. We don't have a recognizable system right now.
Karen, what are your thoughts?
Okay, I have lots of thoughts. I don't know how much time we have, so if you need to cut me off, go for it. Okay. All right. Inclusive adaptation is one critical challenge. We need to adapt the system to meet learners where they are. So for example, the Colorado work-based learning legislation, which is new, is interesting because it recognizes previously acquired skills in the workplace. You can learn a lot about teamwork working in a meat processing plant. Right now, we don't accredit those skills. So in order to do that adaptation well, we need diverse people designing that adaptation, all sorts of diversity, because we all have very different psychological relationships to work. So my first job was in a butcher shop at the age of 12, and I was paid under the table, and I considered it a real promotion to get a legal job at McDonald's when I was 14, worked in a waitressed my way right to university, and have a very different relationship to work than some of my colleagues whose first job was their assistant professorship. So we need to recognize all sorts of diversity in life ways, and make sure the designers are themselves diverse. Scale, the second challenge. So scaling work-based and applied learning, a lot of the great ideas we have don't scale while ensuring inclusivity and accessibility. So I do think online is necessary here. It complements rather than in places in person. Of course, Sanjay, we agree. Addressing the digital divide is key, but essentially it's all about scale at this point, scale with quality. A third is data, and I mentioned earlier the temporal aspect of this. So it's the quality and velocity of data flowing through the labor and educational markets on which skills are needed where and when. Otherwise, we're all driving blind into the future of work. And the fourth and key challenge is EDI or DEI. Hiring frameworks need to change to be more inclusive and eliminate bias, both conscious and unconscious. And so we need to be thinking about the ways in which we're enabling learners to signal their skills in a way that mitigates against that bias, while also working with essentially the HR function to adopt new innovative ways to hire that probably mean we are going to move away from courses more towards, as we've all spoken about, badging, digital credentialing, and sort of micro experiential learning. And I'll stop there.
Maybe I'll just add one more thing to something Karen said, which I very much appreciate. The separation between work and learning has become more and more firm. Actually, Kat Sanchez has this great comment about back when working for $14 an hour could get you through university, and we can't do that anymore. So you got to go all in, take a loan, In Massachusetts, where I live, there is an extensive 27 vocational technical schools, VOTEC schools. The rest of the country is pretty much dismantled in the United States, VOTEC schools. But the idea of a young person working while they're in school and getting exposed, as Karen did and Karen talked about, to work and learning about life and teamwork is extraordinary. So I think that's something that we should all sort of keep in mind. The other thing I'll say is that one aspect of learning, which we don't talk enough about, is the power of coaching. There's a great book about this by the late, much lamented Anders Ericsson, who wrote a book called Peak, The Science of Expertise, which is a beautiful book. The power of coaching. And one of the things about coaching is it transforms. Michelangelo became what he was, not because of online courses or lectures. It was all coaching. And unfortunately, that's where equity comes in as well, because those opportunities are socially constructed and they're unevenly distributed and unevenly given. So those who have access to coaching gain a lot. And this is something, again, from our earlier discussions, we need to figure out how to scale and do it in a humane and equitable and diverse way.
Do we have time to address some points in the chat, Galina? Or?
Yes, we will have time. Mitchell, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, we're going to head to Q&A right now, and I'm going to invoke a tiny bit of executive privilege and make a comment in light of this exchange. Two comments, actually. The first is kind of a Schoolhouse Rock version of higher education history. The four-year college degree as the sine qua non credential for workplace respectability is very new. It began in the United States with the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, otherwise known as the GI Bill, which was a program for working learners, if there ever was one. That coupled with the various exigencies of the Cold War brought us the National Defense Education Act of 1952 and the Higher Education Act of 1965, all of which meant that the federal government, supported by states, created a post-secondary system in which the 2-year or 4-year degree became the sine qua non of employable credentials, and it was all underwritten by public subsidy. But we shouldn't expect that regime to last forever. And in fact, it's becoming clear that that system was beginning to break down as early as the 1980s with skyrocketing debt, cost shifting of the cost of education away from government toward individuals. And it's really, what we're talking about now, I would suggest, is sort of part of an ongoing decline of the hegemony of the 2-year and 4-year degree, which many of us think is a smiley face, except it scares the daylights out of colleges and universities that are organized around conventional degrees. And as a nation, we don't know how to govern this new ecosystem. We don't know how to fund it. We don't know what responsible behavior looks like. We don't know what kind of future ecosystem we're trying to build. And what I find so challenging and important about what Sanjay and Karen are saying is they're pointing out to us that we actually need to, design a new infrastructure. And the project that we're convening today, over the month of July, is very much a science project, but I would suggest that it's also a civic project in which we're trying to sort of think through, what the 21st century work and learning ecosystem should look like. And we need to recognize that, colleges and universities will not retain their cartel over workplace credentials. But what happens after that cartel is gone, I think is a very large, science policy question on my view. I'll turn it back to Anne and Jelena.
Hey,
Anne, did you want to jump in and allow the plenary speakers to address some of the questions and comments in the chat?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Thank you.
What we wanted to do is move from a little bit of history to address some of the urgency that people are experiencing right now. And I'm going to aggregate 3 questions here for our panelists. And the first is, could you give some advice on the needed changes to accrediting bodies, how they would address the needs of our working learners and the employers who engage them? How will our science of applied learning address the persistent advantaging by employers of learners who attend elite institutions? And finally, who should own the transcript?
I think that I want to address the first and third very quickly, and I think that the transcript ought to be owned by the student. The transcript today is owned by the college or the entity. And frankly, I think that's a very unfortunate power structure, because if I drop out of college, someone else has to bless me, even though I might have everything. And so this whole micro-credentialing thing requires that exactly a portfolio, for example, as Karen put in, right? Micro-credentialing enables the student to own it and the employer to judge. But having said that, we have a big problem. Let me explain. I was talking to someone today in the Middle East, and he was telling me, I have no idea what it means for someone to be an expert on data science. Literally, we have no standards. We have from mechanical engineering undergraduate programs, but we don't know what it means to be a data scientist. And there is no master, there are some master's programs. So really, we also need to figure out competency levels and standards. And I think that the accreditation agencies aren't there at all, actually. So I'll just stop there.
Jelena, I just think you should jump in because you have so much to say on these topics. Do you want to offer anything?
No, look, I am just here to support you. When I say that my mind is going so much, I think that we are in a space right now. I see a great deal of opportunity for the accrediting bodies to really reset. I think that we need to engage in some different conversations, because oftentimes I feel that some of the accrediting bodies, they are barriers, specifically for working learners, right? They're barriers for faculty, they are barriers for administrators. They, in one aspect, they protect academic programs and provide a sense of support and provide a foundation, but we really need to start engaging in conversations about how are we inflicting wounds on ourselves within these accrediting bodies. And it's not to say to, take it all away, throw it completely out, but times have changed. The students have changed. Society continues to change. So why are we not looking at our accreditation and expecting that same change, right? And I don't know what that change looks like, but I really think that we need to take this opportunity to problematize and challenge, our accrediting bodies to really push us to tap into a different space of innovation. Because if not, I think we're going to get, I can't think of a better term right now, but kind of left in the dust, right? And we're it will be a disservice to our society, not just to our learners, to our society, right? If we're talking about working learners. So I'm gonna be quiet and turn it back over to Karen and Sanjay.
Well, you lit a fire in the chat. So why don't you read all the comments and then we'll do another round. I hope you get to respond to those. I did also want to pick up on a couple of other points. I agree that accreditation bodies are like the midwives. I don't know if that's probably the wrong analogy of the cartel. But I wanted to go back to the point about coaching, because I think it speaks to the point that as we go through this process of the system adapting to the needs of the learners, we all need to adapt. And I'm just going to speak here as an educator. Sanjay, I totally agree that coaching is a wonderful thing to adopt. I spent my last sabbatical when I was at Stanford doing a full year professional master's level coaching accreditation, a professional one. Had I known how much work it would be, I would never have embarked on this endeavor. I sat in a room for a year with mid-career coaches and HR professionals working with usually executives in Silicon Valley. And this was the only course in my life that I nearly failed. In fact, I did fail the final exam. I was the only person in the class put on probation, and I eventually passed. And what I learned is that professors are trained in monologue rather than dialogue. And we are trained in hierarchy rather than inclusion, and so on and so forth. And if we can't grow beyond that mindset as a professoriate, it will be very hard for the system to adapt. So that is, of course, the accreditation bodies need to adapt in the senior administration, but the kind of the actual way of being of professors needs to adapt. And that's a profound change. And I don't think it's very easy to step into a coaching mindset, although mentoring is somewhat easier. So this process of adaptation is very interesting because it's psychological, as well as data-driven or institutional. So I wanted to acknowledge you said that, but just also acknowledge how hard it would be.
I will just say that the most humbling and important experience of my own life has been being an entrepreneur. As a professor, you're standing on the stage with an adoring set of students whose grades you control. But to walk into a sale, fail, be turned down by a junior procurement officer, and walk out with their ego and tatters and have to reconstruct it. This is something that a lot of professors don't have to face, but it gives us empathy when we deal with others, and it gives us vulnerability. And also, I think it opens us to the challenges of equity, because all those things in the real world are out there. We just don't see them.
So the last question that I want to ask is going back to a concept that Sanjay brought up early, which is the last mile. And that is, how in the world would a working learner know she is in the last mile? What is the last mile in education? Aren't we lifelong learners?
Juliana, Karen, would you like to have a go?
This again, and I noticed a comment by Marie Cheney in the chat. She said, you know, that institutions are not separate from accreditors, right? They work in tandem. They work as collaborators per se, right? And I think that's a question. Again, it's time for us to push back on that, because there are certain accrediting bodies that says that, you know, that 100 means that you are competent. Well, the 99, I don't believe that person's not competent. And are we considering any of the experiences, right? So one of the things that I'm really big on, and I tell my students as an adult educator who focus and teach adult education, bring your full selves to this learning space. Your experiences are welcome, but we haven't figured out how can we value their experiences? How can we create a way to say, you have this experience, so that is equivalent, or it is competent, or you've demonstrated this competency, right? We struggle with that. And so I don't know what, I'm like you, Ann, we're lifelong learners. So why do we have these hard stops in this, like, you know, we're very rigid. And after someone has poured in and dedicated time and they're at 99, and you're like, no, you're not complete. You need that one. You need that one. I struggle with that. I really struggle with that.
I have a sort of a provocative thought as we approach the end, which is the crowning glory of the Industrial Revolution was interchangeable parts, which is sort of falsely attributed to Eli Whitney. It was actually the French military who figured it out. But I actually think what we've achieved in education is it's sort of a sad thing, which is interchangeable people. And 100, as opposed to 99, Juliana, is a measure. You made the cut because now you're interchangeable. You can be a cog in the wheel. As we enter the gig economy, as people have to become the CEOs and the chief financial officers and the chief marketing officers of their own lives, we have to let people flourish in their own pathways of success. This is why the transcript, which is about interchangeable people, has to be, in my view, broken down and let everyone be special and different to look for an avenue that makes them successful. So I think coming back to your question, Anne, I think the problem with the last mile is we don't know what that avenue is. So if you're in marketing and COVID hit and you suddenly have to become an Instagram marketer, but you didn't know about it, and you find out too late when all the jobs are gone, you're just trapped in that chasm.
Can I link this back to something that was said in the chat, I think by MJ? I think MJ, you said abolish the transcript. That might have been more, I might be attributing more revolutionary language to you than you used, but I do think it's interesting to think about the fact that our current institutional frameworks create the last mile as a sort of a symptom or an unhappy byproduct of this battle to get over the finish line or through the gateway to gain a document, the transcript that provides signaling power in the labor market that you are indeed, you know, you're an interchangeable commodity in the labor market, as Sanjay says. But if we adopted incremental portfolios and continuous learning, the last mile would vanish, or at least diminish as an issue. And indeed, of course, we do see companies like Shopify or Google hiring people without degrees based on what they can actually do. And based on incremental portfolios, Unity 3D, we're doing a very cool project with them. Unity Learn gets 500,000 unique visitors a month. They want to have a more inclusive approach to strategic workforce development for the rapidly expanding AR, VR, MR sector. They're actually wanting to have work-based learning in portfolios so that people who don't even have a degree at all, not one course at an accredited institution, could conceivably build portfolios and get jobs. And so then it's not any longer a last mile issue. And so thinking through these alternatives that sort of transcend the last mile is something I'm really interested in.
Well, join me in thanking our panelists virtually. Great job. I'm going to turn the time over to Mitchell, and guess what? It's time for work streams. Take it away, Mitchell.
Yeah, that was, thanks everyone. That was Karen, Jelena, and Sanjay. That was terrific dialogue. Y'all know where you need to, most of you know where you need to go. If you don't, I'm going to stay here in the main room and make sure that you can get to where you need to go. Looking forward to more.